Welcome everyone. My name is Don Schiefelbein. I own and manage Schiefelbein Farms in Kimball, Minnesota with my family. I also serve as this year's president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I am pleased to welcome you to our webinar focused on drought planning tonight. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen during the webinar, and at the end of the presentations, we will get to as many of those as time will allow. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org. Just look for the producer tab on the website. The webinar tonight, titled Defeating Drought, Rain or Shine, will feature three outstanding contributors. First, Jeff Goodwin. Jeff Goodwin serves as Program Director for the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute. Prior to his position at Texas A&M, Jeff served for 5 years as Senior Rangeland Consultant at Noble Research Institute in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and as the State Rangeland Management Specialist for USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service in Temple, Texas. Mr. Goodwin has over 20 years of experience working directly with producers and grazing land managers, implementing stewardship-focused management. Our next panelist will be Mr. Bob McCann of Victoria, Texas. He is a friend of my family, and he oversees the cattle operations and recreational hunting and wildlife operation for his family's company, McFadden Enterprises Limited. McCann has served as president for both Texas and Southwest Cattle Raisers Association and as National Cattlemen's Beef Association president. McCann served as a TSCRA director in 1990. He held the position of president of TSCRA from 2003 to 2005. He is a past president to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Prior to him being president, he held the position of vice president with NCBA. He also serves as council member of the King Ranch Institute for Range Management. Governor Rick Perry appointed him to the Farm and Ranch Lands 2006 Conservation Council. Bob and his wife Julie are most proud of their two children, Robert August and Mary Isabel. The children are the sixth generation of their family to work on the McFadden Ranch. Our third presenter tonight is Mr. Kobe Buck. As Director of Strategic Accounts, Kobe Buck advises ranchers and industry stakeholders to leverage the power of AgriWeb and improve operational efficiency, productivity, and economic viability. Kobe grew up on Ray Ranch, located at the junction of the Great Plains and Sandy Chop Hills of northeastern Colorado. As a fifth-generation cattle rancher, he was introduced to the family livelihood first by way of post-hole diggers, but over time assisted his parents in deploying rotational grazing and other progressive management practices. After graduating from Harvard in 2016, Kobe cultivated his career in energy and agricultural, commodity, supply chains, and merchant trading. In early 2020, Kobe Buck joined the company in preparation for AgriWeb's expansion to the United States. Jeff, the program is yours.
Good evening, everyone. It's certainly an honor to be with you tonight. I really appreciate everybody taking the time out of their evening to visit with us. Again, my name is Jeff Goodwin. I work for Texas A&M University and worked for several organizations throughout my career. That's given me the opportunity to work with some of the best operators in the cow-calf and stocker industry sectors across much of the Great Plains. And we had what I thought we might do tonight is just sort of go over sort of where we are with the drought situation in the country and kind of discuss where our status is across many of the regions of the state or the country, and really just focus in on kind of where we go from here. I'd also like to maybe talk about a few items that I've experienced in working with many of these producers that have been helped them become successful working their way through these drought conditions. So we'll start by getting right into it and look at the US Drought Monitor. I pulled this one today, actually. This is the most recent drought monitor from April 19th, 2022. And you can see we've got a considerable amount of drought in the West. If you've never seen one of these drought monitor maps, they're really pretty informative. If you look at the intensity ratings, that's what the different colors that you're seeing over here. So the white is none, the yellow is what they call D0 or D abnormally dry. And so D1 drought would be moderate, D2 severe, and then go on, so on and so forth throughout the extreme and exceptional drought areas. And so as we look at the drought in the Central Plains and the West, we see a considerable amount of severe, extreme, and exceptional areas, with a large amount of the exceptional drought areas, which is a significant departure from normal precipitation across much of Oklahoma and Texas. If we kind of take a look at sort of where we were last year, the map on the left is from April the 13th, 2021, and the one on the right is from last week in 2022. And we could begin to see some pattern differences at this time into the spring, coming into the growing season. We had some severe exceptional drought throughout the West, certainly through New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Utah and Nevada. Certainly still in drought this year in those areas, but probably not as severe. The severity seems to have moved a little bit further into the Central Plains, and then certainly through Oklahoma and Texas. One of the interesting things of note here is as we look at the statistical comparisons here at the bottom of the screen, we see that in the similar weeks in 2021 versus 2022, we actually had these numbers represent the area of the country. So, for instance, on D4 drought, last week we're at 9.06% of the country is in D4 drought. Comparatively, as you look at, that was in 2021, comparatively as you look at it, when we get into these cumulative ratings, down to D1 to T4, we're at 56.73%. And so that means that over half of the country is in either moderate to exceptional drought. 43% is in severe to exceptional drought. So we've got the difference between those 2 years is we have a lot greater spread of the country that's in these considerable drought conditions. So as we look at where those exceptional drought areas and the predominance of the extreme drought, we pull out Texas and just look at it for a second. We begin to again look at those statistical drought conditions in terms of percent area, and we see that even comparing to 3 months ago, at the beginning of the year, we had 0% of the state in exceptional drought, and now we're at almost 16% of the state. Over half of the state, 53.4%, is in extreme drought or exceptional drought, and almost 3/4 of the state is severe to exceptional. So we're in a pretty extended time period of really dry weather, and we know what that does to forage production and predictability and quality. And so we're moving into the spring growing season in this part of the state. We're starting to green up, and we're in that period where the rainfall here just really sets us up for a successful growing season. And we're not heading into a very good picture. It's reminding me of, unfortunately, a little bit of the year 2011, which was our greatest drought on record. And hopefully we don't have that again, but we need a rain. As we look at Oklahoma, Oklahoma Mesonet, it's a really good opportunity for you to really dig into the data if you're interested and live in Oklahoma. They've got a very good product that provides all of these scattered weather stations across the state. But what you're looking at here is on their website. They have some interpretive maps, and this one really talks and speaks to the departure from normal rainfall. So what you're seeing here is essentially where areas of below normal precipitation in terms of inches. So you can see down here in south central Oklahoma where they're in an exceptionally high, exceptional drought. They're about 11 to 10 inches behind where they should be in terms of rainfall from October 1st to April. So they're about almost 10 to almost a little less than a foot behind on their rainfall for the year. This is another pretty informative program. If you live in the Plain States or in even through the Great Plains, any of these states, it's called GrassCast. It's a product from one of the USDA climate hubs, and you can pull these maps at any time. They upload them, I believe, every week or maybe every 2 weeks. But what you're seeing here is a prediction model of predicting forage production extending out through the end of August. So based on the left, you see a map that's predicting if we get above normal precipitation, what is our departure in terms of average forage production. In the middle, if we get normal precipitation through that time period, and then what is our, on the right, the graphic shows what is our predicted forage production look like if we're below normal in terms of precipitation. What's a little alarming is this map in the center. So even if we got normal precipitation through April, there are several counties in Texas and Oklahoma that are going to produce below normal, even into that orange area, up to 30% less forage production this year, meaning that even if we get normal production, they're not going to make up, even if we get normal precipitation, they're not going to make up the production likely, and will likely be 15 to 30% below in terms of forage productivity. Certainly, as we look at the graphic on the right, we'll be well under 30% departure if it doesn't continue to rain. So these kind of maps are really a pretty nice way for you to just kind of dig in, certainly if you live in this part of the country. As we look at southwestern United States, it doesn't paint a very good picture. Even with above normal rainfall in certain parts of New Mexico and Arizona, we're looking at 30 to greater than 30% departures in terms of reduced amounts of forage productivity, even if it starts raining now. And so the picture is a little bit bleak. I mean, we want to be optimistic here, but the data is the data. So I want to sort of pivot here and talk briefly about some key actions that I've been able to work with on a number of producers across the country, and largely it really develops around developing some solid planning and planning ahead, having a solid contingency plan. When a lot of people that will turn this a drought management plan or a drought mitigation plan, hoping for rain is not a very good one. And so having a written plan with actions of how we're going to deal with a situation like this, when the tank water dries up, we're low on grass, or even if we have grass and the tank water dries up because of the drought, that's very often a case. But what about a situation like this? Many of us have gone through those situations where you're not prepared for a late season storm or a late season flood. Many of us have been in these situations. So contingency plans are not just for drought. It's a plan for what do we do when something goes wrong, something that we didn't expect to happen. Let's have a plan of action. And so I don't expect you to read all this. What it is basically is I want to make the point to have something written down, have a general description of your grazing management plan, but most specifically is have those critical dates. What's the critical date that I'm going to use as sort of my trigger to say, have an action plan to where when I reach this date, if I haven't had X or this trigger hasn't happened or has happened, I need to apply some action, whether that's reduce my stocking, whether that's move cattle, find more lease ground, something to alleviate that demand on your forage base. And so when we talk about these contingency triggers, this is a basic list of triggers that have worked well for many of the producers that we've worked with. I like to start out the spring. This is contingent to sort of the southern Great Plains, but you can use these basic dates anywhere where you've got warm season grass dominated rangelands. And basically what we're doing is taking 25% of the rainfall based on the water year. So the water year starts in the fall, not in January 1. Most of that fall moisture is going to help us in the spring. So we start our water years in either October or November. And so basically what we use is our first trigger is April 1st. We want about 25% of our rainfall from November 1 to April 1st. And if you haven't had that by then, you need to start preparing to make some drought decisions. By June the 15th, we ought to have 55% of your total. You can change these numbers and reflect those based on your average rainfall and figure out what the average number that you need for that specific date. In our part of the world, we've grown about half of our forage by the first week or two of June. So we're gonna produce about half of the forage we're gonna grow for the year on that first 22 inches of rainfall. Again, these are numbers for sort of the southern Great Plains. Again, July 15th is another good number. We've grown about 75% of our production by then, and we've had generally about 67% of our rainfall. So these key triggers, if you'll develop those for your operation with your average rainfall, it'll give you an idea of when to start making those decisions. Next, you need to have some kind of a destocking protocol. And it's not just about selling cows. This is not about just having to reduce stocking. It's about reducing the demand. When we work with stocking rates, we've got a demand, which is based on the number of head that you have, and then you've got a supply. It's supply and demand. The supply is your forage resource, and the demand is the pounds of forage that you've got to have to run your stock numbers. So if each of these class of cattle have different animal unit equivalents, which calculate into a different forage demand. And so having a tool like this, and AgriWeb can help you do that, to help you understand what your forage demand is. It'll help you get a better idea, or at least have some documentation of how do I reduce the demand that might hurt me less in the future, like moving away from growing cattle, or maybe even replacement heifers that are 2 years from a paycheck. Maybe we start there before we get into our really productive 3 to 6 year old cows. Monitoring the other side of that equation is really important, and it's having a good inventory of the forage that you have on offer, and having a good estimate of how much you feel like you're going to get throughout the rest of the growing season. I equate this to a grocery store. All of these grocery store managers have an inventory, and they know exactly what's on the shelf at all times. We did a recent survey, and it indicated that less than 15 to 20% of the producers monitored their forage. So they really didn't have a good account of how much tonnage, how much actual forage they had, and were less apt to balance that stocking rate when they needed to. And so again, make those a seasonal assessments. I mentioned earlier, by June 1st, we've produced about 50% of our production. By July 15th, we produced about 75% in our environment here. And then certainly by the first week of September, we've got 90% of the production for the year. So use those dates and those percentages in terms of percent rainfall to make some key decisions on your operation. Lastly, I'll stop with just kind of 3 bullet points that have been effective for many of the producers that we worked with. Number 1, have a plan and make sure you're always thinking ahead. Be 2 steps ahead of the problem. And when you have that plan, make sure you act on it. And so it doesn't help to have a trigger if you don't pull it. And so, and lastly, I would say to make sure and look for alternative opportunities. Look for lease ground that you can find to take the pressure off forage resource. It takes a while for those plants to recover if they're severely overgrazed, especially in dry periods or prolonged yearly droughts. It may take many years for it to get back into condition. So I'll stop there. I think Mr. McCann's ready to go, and there's my information if you'd ever like to send me an email.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Bob McCann, and I'd just like to kind of start out as ranchers and cattle producers. Of course, the one thing that none of us have any control over is, of course, the weather. And I'd say throughout the history of ranch, certainly in this country, drought has played a big factor in economic viability of ranchers throughout history, and so it is certainly a pertinent subject to be addressing tonight. And hopefully we can reflect. I can reflect some of my experiences in the past that might transpose to other parts of the country. I know what we do down here on the Gulf Coast area, Gulf Coast prairies at our home ranch here in Victoria, Texas, is a lot of the things may not apply, but I think there's a lot of general practices that we do that certainly, hopefully, would be of assistance. We live in a 40-inch average county, and I operate 3 different ranches in about actually our home ranch is in a 40-inch average county, but there's 3 ranches that we operate, and some of them are in some counties south of us, but they're all at 36 to 40-inch average. And so far this year, we've had less than 3 inches in the first 4 months. So we're pretty much in that one of those extreme phases that Jeff was talking about. We already kicked off some trigger points. We operate on a prairie ecosystem. It's all native grasses, and we're pretty much of a year-long growing season down here. You can see in the middle of January, if we happen to have a hard freeze or two, we might have some dormant forage for a few weeks, but usually there's something growing out there if we have any moisture at all. A lot of cool season. If we do have some decent moisture, will come, and they will come because of our rotation. And so we started our grazing rotation on the ranch back in the early 90s, and most of the range condition was fairly average to fair to low good. But since we've been building the rotation and subdividing a lot of the pastures, we've kind of built it up. We're kind of a high good to low excellent on most all the pastures now. So we have a animal that we use down here that is we call it a Victoria Brayford, and it's a 3/4 Hereford, 1/4 Brahman Boston-Indicus mix, and we've been breeding this breed. It is now a commercial purebred, and been breeding them since the 1930s, 1940s. And so it's a very good cow for our part of the world. And we do sell commercial purebred Brayford seed stock and heifers and bulls. So when we start talking about reducing herd numbers, we always have a little concern about going too low, cutting too far into our genetics, just like anybody with good genetics would have that concern. So if you, Kobe, we can move on to the next slide. So don't wait for the drought. Be proactive throughout the year in our grazing system. Just kind of as a general rule, we try to take half and leave half as far as the forage. somewhere in that regime. When things are pretty good, if things are growing and moisture is ample, we'll move through the paddocks a little faster. Most of the paddocks are designed for anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. We may leave cattle in a pasture for 2 weeks if things are good. When things start getting dry like they have been lately, we've slowed down the rotation, and which that kind of allows us to have longer rest periods on the other pastures, and will get us through some of these extreme times a little bit better. I will say that the AgriWeb has really helped us be able to keep records on that and make those decisions kind of at the click of our cell phone, if you will, just going throughout the week on a daily basis. If we're getting ready to move a herd, I'll have a discussion with our guys or whoever's moving the herd that, well, maybe if things look like we can leave them in there 2 or 3 days longer, it's going to help. If things are really good and we're not worried about leaving little forage behind, basically we kind of call it stockpiling. So in the good times, we like to try to stockpile, and I think it pays off dividends later when we get into some of these stressful times. All of our rotations are anywhere from 5 to 8 paddocks, one herd, 5 to 8 paddocks. And the recovery, as I said, the grazing period is 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the rainfall. And the recovery is anywhere from 90 to 100 days. And sometimes we're able to stretch that out to maybe 100 pastures with a little bit of tweaking on the grazing time. So the other thing that as we go through our cow-calf calendar throughout the year, we do our spring working in March, and we do wean our calves in May or June. And so we basically just have 2 times that our herds go through the pen. So in our spring working, we'll kind of make the decision, look what environmental situations are looking like, and that's the best time to sort off your older dry cows, palpate the dry cows, and make the decision, if any of those cows that were open, if they come back bred, whether or not you want to keep them another year or not. We give them one chance and put a mark in their ear. And if things are really bad, we don't give them that chance. But if they ever come back through, they have a mark and they'll go to town. The other thing is we try not to really ever stock our country at maximum capacity, and we just try to stay a little bit less than that throughout the year, even in the good years. And kind of in the back of my pocket, I'd just like to have the thought that we're able to come in and use stockers as kind of a flexible line of business to be able to utilize forage. And how we implement that is, if we're going through a culling period like we are right now, during the spring, we did our first culling basically on a few older cows that were open. And then in May, when we wean calves, we will take our next step, and if it's still dry, which kind of looks like it's going to be, we'll look a little bit harder at those wet cows that were carrying calves, and we'll look at age, we'll look at udder quality, and a lot of different criteria, and go ahead and cut into the herd a little bit deeper. And I'm not afraid to do that, usually, in that if we get our numbers down too low, normally, a lot of folks, and I certainly have these worries too, that you're going to get your herd number is going to be too low to be able to have a profitable year the following years after that. It might take you a couple of years to get a bunch of heifers back up and get your numbers back up where you need to be, whereby we've implemented a Stalker program that when we feel like we're kind of coming out of the drought and we're getting some good rains and we're getting some recovery going on, that we can buy some stalkers. And we utilize a lot of Mexican steers down here because we're fairly close to the border, and those cattle do good in this part of the world, and they're pretty thrifty animals, and so we can bring in some Mexican steers and kind of fill in on if we feel like we've got some excess forage. And one of our ranches is a lease ranch also, and it's a pretty big lease ranch. And so it's kind of a critical economic tool for us to be able to, get that ranch, be able to stock that ranch and utilize it. So it helps a lot in that respect also. And it will help the cash flow in some of those years when you're trying to recover from a drought. And so that's kind of a typical deal. I'm sure many of us have gone through. The bottom line might look pretty good that dry year because you're selling so many cattle that you wouldn't normally sell, but you could have, at least one, maybe two or three pretty tough years if you hadn't got a good contingency plan to beef up that cash flow after a lot of heavy culling. So that's one of the things we've utilized in the past, and it's worked well for us. Being able to look up on the AgriWeb and see how many days a pasture has rested and see how many days a pasture has been grazed, it's been really the best tool we've had in a long time. And also we're able to kind of log in during the real heavy growing seasons, how much tonnage that we're producing in certain pastures, and log in those records in the AgriWeb reporting. And we did a lot of that this past year, and 2021, the latter part of 2021 was a really pretty wet year for us, a very highly productive year. And we're able to kind of carry through this tough time right now because of that, and being able to produce kind of quite a bit of capacity there. And it's also kind of given us a little peace of mind to be able to stay with the herd numbers as long as we have. And so we can move on to the next slide, Kobe. So as I mentioned earlier, the kind of the secondary decisions we do, the primary decisions would be of course getting the open cows off, and secondary decisions we go to age and look at body conditions and frames and weight, and as I think Jeff mentioned earlier, it's a really good practice to look at those young herds, palpate your heifers before you palpate anything else. Those are the ones you have the least amount of investment in, and before you go any further investment and time in them, calving out or what have you, it's good to go ahead and cut that, decrease the numbers there, so you can palpate and get rid of, the young open heifers there. As drought conditions intensify, and we will be weaning our calves either in May or June. Sometimes if it's really good conditions, we'll start June, the first or second week of June. This year we're scheduled to start weaning at about the middle of May, and so we'll wean calves a little bit earlier and kind of lighten that nutrient requirement for the cows going into the hotter months. And down here along the coast, the mid to late summer is really our most extreme season of the year. wintertime in this part of the world can be fairly mild, honestly. So we really have to do a lot of preparation for summer, especially if we have a year where we've had limited rainfall like this year, and we're looking at less forage production. Kobe, we can move on. So when drought comes, the grazing management, just in general, our grazing management has helped us get through these droughts, and we've certainly been through many down here, and certainly since we've had the pasture rotation, and it just seems to get us through dry times a little bit better, because the buildup of the forage and just some of the preparation that we do. We certainly will increase that grazing on some of those pastures and allow for longer rest. Just kind of summarizing what I've talked about, the stalkers in tandem with our cow-calf business is always a good tool to be able to use. We do a lot of wildlife management on all of our properties. We have a recreational hunting enterprise on all the properties that we manage, our own properties and the leased properties as well. And so we do population ratios and harvesting ratios and setting quotas, and so when it's dry, we don't we go even harder on the harvest. So we certainly will encourage hunters to go ahead and take the harvestable animals and the females, because they're out there, even though they're eating a little bit different diet than our cattle are, but they're still hard on the habitat, and they're still taking its toll on the habitat, and so we want them to have a good plan of nutrition also. So we do consider that in our stocking rates and in our harvest quotas as well as we go through the years. And as I mentioned earlier, just post-drought, we're understocked. When recovery happens, those stalkers are a great thing, a great tool to be able to use. Move to the next, Kobe. So never stop improving your management kind of goes along with what we've all been hearing about in the sustainability conversations. An environment of constant improvement helps you in so many ways with your grazing management and with your livestock operations. This year we've given a lot of thought to adding paddocks to be able to, anytime you're able to add another paddock onto your rotation system, it certainly helps you be able to have a longer rest. So we're looking at that. We look at water development infrastructure, helping your utilization of your pastures is always a good thing to kind of help you get through these extreme times. We do a lot of prescribed burning in our part of the world, and that certainly helps our forage productivity, and it helps our wildlife production also. We're beginning to increase monitoring on our soil health, and we've always done quite a bit of monitoring on our range conditions, and we feel like our water yields are certainly better quantity and quality wise on the properties since we've implemented a lot of the rotational grazing. We are going to begin a holistic monitoring of biodiversity. We're doing a biodiversity pilot project, and a lot of these things that we're measuring, kind of keeping our records a little better, that with the AgriWeb system is kind of in anticipation of the possibility of any of these ecosystem service markets that may come into play. whether it be the carbon or the biodiversity or the water or what have you. We feel like, verification of what we're doing is going to be a very important factor. And, if we want to be part of this, part of these markets, we're going to have good records. And so far, the AgriWeb has really helped us be able to prove up a lot of our production and a lot of the things that we're doing out here. Our range condition is kind of all rates up there around good to excellent. Big blue stem, which is a big indicator species in our part of the world now, is on the coastal prairies, is now up to about 20%. When we started, there was really very little to be found out on our range. So it's a pretty good indicator for us. Go ahead, Kobe. So just to kind of summarize again, the big priorities, I think, when you get into times of drought, but really kind of being prepared just in normal years as well, that will help you get through these times, is just ensure adequate rest of 90 to 100, 120 days for your pastures that you're resting before you graze. Keep those quality animals in the herd as you do your culling process, and of course those are the animals that are going to be performing the best on your environment and that have proven themselves to do so. Diversifying your business lines with stockers to utilize incremental forage is a great tool. I think in different parts of the country it's going to be different than it is here, but it's always a good tool. And finally, I think a good rancher is always constantly in drought preparation. It's something that's, if any of us have ever been through one, it's always in the back of our minds. So it's pretty hard to forget about it if you get into a bad one. So anyway, thank you very much. That kind of concludes my presentation. I hope I didn't go too long, and hopefully able to provide something that may be of assistance to somebody.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. My name's Kobe Buck. I'm representing our family operation, Ray Ranch, which is located in northeastern Colorado. To put in perspective, here's kind of an overview of our operations. We're primarily a cow-calf design. We run 750 to maybe plus 50, minus 50 on a typical year as far as pairs across 10,000 acres. There's really no average, but if there were an average when it comes to forage production where we're at, it's around 1,900 pounds per acre during a normal year, and our average grazing durations about 7 days on those rotations. If you're throwing a dart at a map, you aim for this red star just right here. We're right at the junction of Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas. Half the operation is located in Nebraska. The other half is located in Colorado. Being in that region makes it pretty dynamic when it comes to management. We like to think that we manage three major different types of ecosystems. We're kind of at the junction of the sand hills as you get further north into Nebraska. We call them the chop hills in our area. Probably less pronounced, a little bit more sagebrush, but this ecosystem and this design makes up about 50% of our operation. We have a narrow, kind of long portion of riverbeds. This is a wet year, but that's its own kind of watershed and its own ecosystem to manage. And then finally, kind of the western Kansas looking terrain of more canyonous soil, shorter grasses, a little bit rougher country is the final portion of our operation and where we graze. So even in a couple of square miles at the state line, the topography and the ecosystem changes quite drastically. To put this in perspective on a map, I just pulled this from our family's AgriWeb account. You can see up north here is where the chop hills are at. We have some grazing on the riverbeds, and then these pastures south of the highway are kind of more of the short grass, rougher terrain. When it comes to drought management, I think that it's something that we're constantly working on. When my brothers and I are becoming more and more active as partners in our family operation, we're looking to revise this on an annual basis and experiment with ways to improve our drought management. But during a normal year is really where that improvement begins. So we've really started to prorate and hone in on, okay, every year changes as far as stocking rates per pasture, grazing days per pasture, amount of moisture during any given period of time. So what does that look like? How can we benchmark that information on the wet years, the dry years, and the years in between? So a key initiative over the last 3 years has been capturing that data and being able to use reports and being able to use that grazing data to dictate what actions are necessary when we come into a drought. With AgriWeb, we've been capturing all of these data points: forage amount, days grazed, as Bob mentioned, days of rest, days that pasture sat empty, the total animal unit days on each pasture, and how that breaks down on a per acre basis. And then also secondary items that we look at, of course, stocking rate all the time, but how much hay do we have on inventory? We do have some fields that produce hay, alfalfa, and some grass mix. What are those yields looking like this year, and what does that mean for our hay inventory if things get dry? How many days of feed do we have at the worst case scenario? I would never recommend buying hay to outlast the drought, but being able to produce some ourselves, it's just an item of our operation that we can flex. So any given day, we're tracking how many grazing days we have left in that pasture, and then being able to take ad hoc forage measurements, as Bob mentioned. But when it comes to our drought management strategy, similar to Jeff, I'm surprised at myself. We actually lined up pretty well with Jeff's guidance. We have some critical rain dates where actions are required. March 1st is our first one, June 1st, July 4th. Ranchers don't take holidays, so it has to be July 4th. And then August 15th are the 4 primary critical rain dates in our area, and how we revise our management. The primary objective is to conserve the forage, conserve the cover, being able to outlast and to build back stronger when it comes to our cow herd at the end of the day when it does rain. But a secondary objective that we've been focusing on in the last couple of years is really retaining as much optionality as possible. When things get dry, odds are we're not the only people in our area in a drought. There's going to be liquidation factors in the market. How can we best navigate that volatility and prepare ourselves for another decade of success when the rain does come? Pre-calving, that's our March 1st date. We typically calve our cows really second half of April is when they start popping, and onwards from there. During a drought condition, if it's dry, if we're trending slightly lower than typical at that point, we look to consolidate cow herds to maximize rest on those pastures during any given period of time, and especially during the spring when our critical precipitation for our growing season really happens April 15th to June 15th. Being able to put those cow herds together and ensure that a majority of our ranch is resting at any given point is really the plan that we operate on. Secondly, March 1st, we're still before the growing season. We adjust our grazing schedules. If it is severely dry, we look to calve our cows in sacrifice areas as opposed to out in the pasture. During this period, we're supplementing with feed anyway, so it makes sense to drive quarter of a mile to where there's a sacrifice area as opposed to driving out in the pasture. And then if severe, I mean, we're still 45 days, 60 days before a lot of our cows pop. So we can evaluate if we do need to let go of some older cows, if we do need to lighten up and maybe take advantage of a hybrid heifer market. We can look at market reports and be able to assess where's the easiest way to lighten our load and ensure that we have the best path forward. I would say selling right before calving somewhat rarer, but we're building our replacement heifer program and being able to let go of a load of heifers. It seems like it could be some optionality that we retain. As we kind of get into the late spring, early summer, June 1st and July 4th are other critical dates. That's June 1st is right before our calf branding. Instead of just making notes of our dries or our cull cows, we actively sort those off, lighten that load for the summer grazing. And then also by sorting off these cows in that June timeframe, we have some flexibility where we can take them to market the next day. We can sort these pairs off, grow the pairs, get that calf to a good point at weaning or for early weaning, and look to capture prices that are typically higher in the July-August period. And really kind of being a holding pattern for the most part when it comes to, do we have to let go of animals? Can we find a place that is smaller, tougher to graze with a larger herd that has adequate forage? Just looking at all those options. And then the July 4th, when it comes to pre-breeding critical day, this is where we might look to shorten our breeding season. I feel like any rancher, when a cow is pregnant, it's very tough to let her go. So by condensing that breeding season from maybe 70 days to 55, I mean, a lot of the tough decisions are removed for you. And then also is looking forward into the future of what happens if we still don't get rain. Is this drought ever going to stop? This sets you up for a good kind of working calendar come fall if early weaning's on the table. That leads us into our August 15th critical day. So our eyes are on the fall cattle work. Typically we wean in late October, early November, and do another sort on the cows. If it's a drought condition, we'd look to move that forward and wean early October, mid-September. And then because we have a shortened breeding season, we can still palpate and preg check those cows kind of right around that weaning period. So we can do a multitude of sorts. That's actually a new initiative that we have going on the operation. And it's largely because of our pastures and kind of how the land lays. So culls and opens might be gone during any given fall sort, but if we have some late breds or some animals kind of on that fence that are young in lay or that are older and bred correctly, well, on our ranch, we have a couple of different escape valves. There are smaller grazing circuits that we can take a truckload of animals and set them in one of these grazing circuits for, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months, depending on how the drought expands or contracts. And being able to dump those in areas where they're easy to gather, easy to take to the sale barn, and also utilize as forage that our larger herds can't, is something that we think is a decent idea. Would love to get the audience's feedback on that to make sure that we're not overlooking anything crazy. But, and right before I jump to that, another major thing that we have on our operation that allows us to be drought resilient would be some irrigated grass under pivots. If the worst comes to worst and we go into a multi-year drought, we can save our best couple hundred head of cows on these irrigated grass pivots. We've had those for about 30 years under grass. We're now looking to subdivide them to get more animal unit days on there. But it's just really been that escape valve that we need when it comes to our conditions, because these ecosystems, the sandy soil is such a fragile ecosystem where you can't continue to graze it into the ground, nor should you. I mean, you of course shouldn't, but you can't really continue to graze it. It has a shorter growth period compared to everything down south. But that's how we manage the ranch during drought and how we prepare. Finally, I just wanted to kind of highlight this because I don't think it gets talked enough in our industry. When it comes to drought, it's the most stressful time, and it's pretty demoralizing for all ranchers in that drought. I would just recommend, whether it's your neighbors, whether it's your family or friends, I mean, really kind of have that relationship that you can leverage to make sure that others are being looked after. Also, it's incredibly tough to separate business from family time. Try to not bring the drought into the house, and heck, I mean, look to take time off if you can during this period, because you can only work so hard. I mean, working harder is not going to fix the weather at the end of the day. Thank you very much for your attendance today. If you have any questions, toss them in the chat, or if you want to reach out to me, my email is just my name, coby.buck@agroweb.com. Thank you.
Well, Jeff, Bob, and Kobe, thank you very much. It's obvious NCBA is all about bringing the latest relevant information to our members in the industry. And tonight, the fantastic speakers showed that loud and clear. So thank you guys so very much. Now let's get right into your questions. Thank you again for participating in the webinar tonight. I'll hand it over to Michaela Klauser, NCBA staff, to moderate the Q&A. Michaela?
Great. Thank you so much, Don. And thank you, Jeff, Kobe, and Bob, for being here with us tonight. You guys certainly provided a lot of great information. We can just go ahead and dive right into some of these questions. This first one is for Jeff. Jeff, are you still on with us?
I'm here.
There we go. Jeff, so when you mentioned contingency planning, we had a couple of questions come through. So who should producers loop in or consult when they're creating their plan, or what resources do you recommend that they reach out to when they're in those beginning stages of creating their contingency plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of different resources out there that you know, consulting type organizations that can help. Certainly, you can. There's some individuals that work with the Natural Resources Conservation Service that can help. Noble Research Institute that does some consultation as well. But to be honest with you, the best person to help you do that is get within some of these peer networks with the grazing land coalitions, or a neighbor that's been through it. It's been in your environment that has got a written plan, has worked through those. Likely going to learn as much or more from somebody that's been through the thick and the thin, just like you're trying to go through. So I would look for some of your neighbors or colleagues throughout NCBA and others, and see kind of where they've been.
Great, that's a great answer. Thanks, Jeff. Bob, this next question came in for you. A producer wants to know what your process was when you were deciding that best rest time of 90 to 120 days, and how that's impacted your drought planning plan.
Well, we really didn't want to organize our rotation system to be the highly intensive, just move every day or every 2 days or whatever. But we just don't really, we're really not set up for that, and labor wise, and also with our hunting enterprise, we wanted to make sure we kind of had the big pasture scenario still perception wise anyway. So we didn't want to have, electric fence every 3 or 4 feet, but having a bigger paddock, and most of our paddocks are anywhere from 500 to 700 acres. So they're fairly good size. And so that kind of put us in a situation where we're a little bit more of not such a high frequency. And so the 2 to 3 weeks works pretty well in that size of operation. Our cow herds, for the most part, are between 275 and 300 cows in those herds. So it's just kind of the amount of time that they'll spend going through there, and with that very basic tenet of take half and leave half. And sometimes, we get into these drier situations. There might be some times you might have to take a little more than half. And but that's what we try to do. We try to live and die by that take half and leave half. And so that's what kind of put us into that format, if you will. And but that format probably allows for it probably maximizes around 8 to 10 paddocks. And if you start adding more than 10, I think sometimes maybe you can get into a little more of an intensive type of a program. So that's kind of what landed us there, and it works pretty well for our operation. And 300 cow herd. I know many of y'all had experience. You go through the pens with a 300 cow herd, and that's a pretty good day's work. So I'm not real fond of going through having to work 400 or 500 in a day. So that's the other part that kind of landed us there, I guess.
Absolutely. Don't blame you there, but that's really great advice. A follow-up question for you, Bob. We had someone come in and ask, so what were you using before you implemented the AgriWeb program, and how have you seen your program improve since using that tool?
Well, we were basically just kind of on the back of a notebook type of operation, a calendar and mark down the day that the cattle went in and mark down the day they went out. We really didn't have a very good grasp on the deferment period. But I mean, we knew, we were in a pasture for 21 days or 14 days or whatever it is. We knew, well, it's time to move. But throughout the ranch with the 3 different grazing systems, we kind of would lose track of the deferment. So that's a big thing that AgriWeb has certainly done for us, to be able to keep that history of throughout the year, how many days rest those pastures have had. And I think as we look at some of these ecosystem programs, you'll see some that are designed or may have a prerequisite of, pastures that are grazed 20% of the year, or 25% of the year, or 15% of the year, and then rested 75 to 90% or whatever. And however that all plays out in these markets, I don't know, but I know that verification is going to be a big part of it. So if we're able to kind of look back on our records and have a good history that we can prove up, I think that means a lot, and it certainly means a lot in my management as well, because I can get a lot of peace of mind knowing that I've got a couple of pastures ahead of me that have had, 90 to 100 days rest, even in tough times, so they're going to still provide pretty good nutrition. So.
Absolutely. Kobe, did you have anything to add, or anything that you wanted to add with your experience and your family's operation, and kind of what those big learning curves that you've had to adjust your herd as you prepare for these dry seasons?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. For us, I mean, really knowing and figuring out how to best manage each one of the 3 different ecosystems, if you will, that we have to graze across, what was huge. I mean, I think that we figure it out via napkin math, as Bob kind of hinted it out, or at least we did. But being able to utilize technologies like NRCS Web Soil Survey and the various tools that Bob, or that Jeff highlighted in his presentation, to enter the actual forage amount and have the offtake from AgriWebb just commingle and work together gives us a lot more information on any given year and what that means from a stocking rate perspective. In our country, our annual precipitation is about 17 inches. So really 7 days are the difference when it comes to 7 wet days, I should say, or dry days, is the difference between a great year and a drought in our area. So if those days come more so in April than in August, it's a different grazing regimen and it's different metrics that we have based off of our forage requirement or our forage growth curves. And trying to juggle all that together, just our families just found AgriWebb to be a great tool. When we have our family meetings, we can all log on to it and kind of throw ideas out how to best navigate different situations.
That's great. It certainly is a excellent resource. And Kobe, I want to thank you for pointing out the people aspect of all of this. I think that gets forgotten during some of these really tough times. So that was a good call out, and appreciate that, checking in on your neighbors and your friends. But that wraps it up for us tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining. The recording will be available at ncba.org underneath the producer tab. And thank you again, Bob, Kobe, and Jeff for speaking on such a relevant topic right now that we're all experiencing, and Don for hosting. And hope everyone has a great night. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, guys.